Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Despite the difference in reputation coming into Mercedes this year between Hamilton and George Russell, Russell has revealed the status of the drivers within the team, saying there's no number one driver. Hamilton is certainly not the number one driver. The priority is winning races, whatever the situation. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. Wanted to make a couple of comments here on this whole Silverstone shenanigans because you guys may well have seen yesterday they put the tickets live and then it was an absolute nightmare. They're doing some sort of system where I'm not sure if they've kind of scrapped this because I went on the website just now and it doesn't seem like this is the case anymore, but the idea was if there was a lot of demand for a particular type of ticket, the price would just like rise on its own. Like they'd set the price and then if there was a lot of people wanting that ticket, then the price would just go up to the demand, which is like you're kind of screwing over your fans in a way. Like what's the need to do that? Set the ticket prices, keep the ticket prices. What's the issue? So it was an absolute disaster about this. So they basically just said, yeah, it's not going to work. The website was just crashing or whatever. And then they go again today. So I think it's better today. I think the website's still a bit slow and stuff. But yeah, if you guys want to try again, then the option is now available. But a lot of it's already been sold out for some of the grandstands at the very least. I don't believe that whole ticket, like kind of price gouging thing's happening anymore, but it might still be the case. Let's talk Colton Herta because this drama seems to have come to an end now. There was some talk F1 tweeted this out today saying that Colton Herta is still looking to do some track time before the season ends. I thought the idea was from Red Bull. The plan is, right, they want Colton Herta instead of Gasly because Gasly is probably going to go to Alpine. But maybe Gasly to Alpine doesn't happen unless Colton Herta comes through. Current American IndyCar driver, they want him for the American audience, right? Which I suppose it makes sense within the kind of Red Bull program. Now, Colton Herta doesn't have enough super license points. What they could have done is get him in a couple of FP1 sessions with AlphaTauri, Alpine, and the like, and then he would effectively prove his worth and be able to get a seat. Red Bull kind of seem to have had enough though with all this effort and now apparently abandoned the efforts, and I believe also Andretti has kind of upped the numbers in IndyCar side to keep him on board next season. So Herta is probably not going to be in Formula 1. That doesn't necessarily mean though apparently that Gasly won't go to Alpine. That was the initial discussion, that if Colton Herta doesn't go to AlphaTauri and they can't get him because of the super license stuff, then Gasly will stay there and he won't go to Alpine and they have to have a different driver. But Gasly, we believe, is the guy that Alpine want if this comes to one end rather than another. And an article actually came out here from Motorsport magazine saying that despite the fact that Herta is not going to happen to the Red Bull program with AlphaTauri, Gasly to Alpine is not off the table as is described. Red Bull originally wanted Herta as a replacement for Gasly, or the Frenchman has to stay. In the meantime, however, there seems to be a new candidate outside of the Red Bull pool. Red Bull does not want to comment on this. So rather interesting, like Red Bull haven't denies that they're now looking at another option because, you know, Gasly is probably not going to stay around in their program for too much longer. Perez, of course, has signed another year on his deal. He was pretty good at the start of the year. Now, not necessarily the case. And Gasly, like, he would have to work very hard and prove an awful lot to get another chance in the Red Bull. And maybe he doesn't want another chance in the Red Bull and prefer to kind of take his talents elsewhere and potentially build up to a different top team. So it seems like Red Bull are kind of happy to let Gasly go, but it means they've got to have someone talented else to come into that seat. And maybe they've got someone else on their minds that is, as yet presently unknown. So we'll stay tuned for that one. But even, Helmut Marko mentioned that it's a shame that people don't realize what value an American driver, especially a guy like Colton Herta, could have. Kind of saying that, the main priority here was not just because he's a promising talent, but also that, American driver should be good for, revenue and the like. So it makes sense, I suppose, for Red Bull to consider. So it makes me wonder whether if they are considering, someone else instead of Herta, is there another, American driver that they might be considering, or is someone else on their radar? Who knows? We shall have to find out. This also on the Alfa Romeo side, just to say that, Zhou Guanyu does indeed believe that he will be signed relatively soon to be their driver alongside Bottas going into the new year. So good stuff. He reckons it'll be all done relatively shortly. Now, speaking of driver pairings, Ocon and Alonso has been a very interesting one this season. Ocon has more points than Alonso, but you could argue when you look at the state of the reliability issues that Alonso has suffered with, that he probably would be above Ocon if things went as maybe they could have done. And quite the statement from Ocon here, actually, kind of comparing his performance to that of Fernando's right now. I look at Fernando's career, the only teammate who was at his level was Lewis. All the others did no better than myself, right? Looking at even guys like Button and all these guys, saying like, look, no one ever performed against Alonso quite as well as I've done, apart from maybe Lewis Hamilton in that McLaren way back in the day. So, quite the statement really from Ocon. Like, I think Ocon's a good driver. I wouldn't necessarily say he's a great driver. driver by any means, but look, he's a solid driver. I think maybe he is somewhat underrated in terms of the results he delivers. It's questionable driving at times, pushing his teammates off the road, that type of stuff. But look, I think at the end of the day, when a driver has confidence in themselves to be like the top of your class racing driver, you've got to have some sort of ego, right? And actually believe that you are better than your teammate and can potentially be the best driver in the world. And I think Ocon's kind of right to back himself in this sense. His statement, though, is rather interesting. Look at some of the other teammates that Alonso has had over the years. Another interesting pairing was Sainz and Leclerc. So this is kind of the whole 1-2 driver discussion. We saw Ferrari this year, like they kind of stated they don't really have a 1-2 driver thing going on. Seemed relatively clear to us after the first few races that Leclerc was probably the only guy to have a chance to match Max Verstappen this year, so it would kind of have made sense maybe if Ferrari committed to that early, because it's difficult to beat Red Bull and Max when it's kind of clear what Red Bull do. Like, they've developed their car in a certain direction, a direction that can make the car faster, and Verstappen is a guy that likes a pointy car that he can control the oversteer of, that can be quicker in theory, and Perez has been hurt by that as the year has progressed. Ferrari haven't necessarily done that, and Sainz has actually been performing very well in the latter half of the season, I think, at least so far, and the gap between himself and Leclerc has closed rather significantly, and Leclerc, of course, has had a rather difficult time. So that's always the discussion. Who's the number one driver? Who's the number two driver? Because, look, Sainz outscored Leclerc last season in the championship. He probably won't do it again this year, and Leclerc, I guess, is still, in a lot of people's eyes, going to be the number one guy. Quicker qualifying pace, potentially quicker race pace as well, but in terms of results, it can be sometimes a different story. Now, that's also been a big question with Mercedes, right? Because, of course, Hamilton comes in, and there's never going to be a world in which Hamilton is the number two driver at Mercedes. He's either going to be the number one driver, or he's going to be kind of like there is no number one driver, or whatever they say. That's what Ferrari say. That apparently is what Mercedes say. In fairness, that's what Red Bull say, but you kind of know Red Bull, like, they have their number one guy. Like, it's not exactly a secret, and it's been the case with Mercedes in the past, where Hamilton's the main guy, Bottas is the supporting cast. That's how it is. Now, with Russell in, it's obviously a different story. He's outscoring Hamilton so far this season, had incredibly consistent race results. Probably, if you look at the average numbers, hasn't quite had Hamilton's race pace on average in the races that the Mercedes have done rather well, but in terms of qualifying, Russell has a pole position, Hamilton does not this season, and he was asked at the Monza Grand Prix, what about the strategy situation at the end of the Zandvoort Grand Prix, where they decided to, well, he decided himself to pit himself, come in for the soft tyres, and then go on to give himself a chance to get that podium that he delivered, and Hamilton, of course, ends up falling outside of the podium after getting left out on the mediums. The other alternative was leave Russell out also on mediums, Verstappen would be P3, and then try and use both of the cars to defend against Verstappen, and Russell effectively would be the lamb to the slaughter to try and hold down Verstappen so Hamilton could win the race. But he reckons that that's never really on the cards. There are no team orders. There's no number one driver.
Okay, listen, a lot's been talked about what happened at the end of the race in Zandvoort. We've heard various explanations and why it was right that the team tried what they tried. Just wonder from your viewpoint, if they had asked you to act as Lewis's buffer and it been a kind of team order, would you have been prepared to do that? Are you glad that they didn't do that?
Well, I think it's we'll both go out and do the best race possible for the team and for ourselves, and ultimately I want to finish as high as possible, and if we both stayed out and there was an opportunity to go for the lead, I'd have gone for it. Equally, would have had Max directly behind me on the fresh tyres. I prefer finishing second than I do finishing third, so I'd be doing my utmost to keep it like that. But there's no team orders, there's no number one, no number two. We're on a completely equal playing field, and that's how it should be.
Which I think, given the way the season has gone, is certainly understandable, right? Russell, of course, is outscoring Hamilton, and at the end of the day, the plan will be for Mercedes is just to win a race. I think that probably their thought process at this point is there's no real number one guy like Hamilton, Russell, whoever is in the best position to try and win a race weekends, the other driver will probably need to support. Now, you might have thought they'd have done that in Zandvoort. They kind of didn't, but I would expect maybe that to happen going forward. If Russell is in, has the best chance to win a race, you would expect maybe Mercedes to use Hamilton's strategy to try and support that end. And if it's the other way around where Hamilton is in the position to win, they'll probably try and use Russell to help deliver the goods in one way or another. They may well not. They may just let the drivers fight as they have done before. But seemingly there's no clear Hamilton's the number one guy, Russell's the number one guy, whatever, within the team. Makes sense given the way it's gone. But of course, the numbers also indicate that Russell is performing better than Hamilton, at least over the course of the season so far. I think Hamilton is slightly ahead of Russell in terms of qualifying qualifying result is the other way around in race results, but you could argue there's been a fair few safety cars this year which have caused Hamilton to lose, slightly position to Russell. And in terms of average race pace, it's probably been pretty similar, and in some tracks where Mercedes have been marginally more competitive, Hamilton's generally been the slightly faster car. But I mean, look, still, Russell's done an incredible job so far this year for Mercedes. Definitely when Hamilton does go on to retire in a few years' time, who knows how long he's going to stay around, Russell more than likely is going to be that number one guy and step into those shoes. But for now, it seems pretty clear that they're not going to tell Russell to step aside for Hamilton or tell Hamilton to step aside for Russell, unless, of course, it means that, one of them could go on to win a race, which probably is what the intention will be for Mercedes from now to the end of the year. So I'd expect that is kind of their number one priority, as opposed to which one of their drivers they're most supporting. But definitely intrigued to your thoughts on this stuff in the comment section below. Just to mention this before we close out, wins from the most grid positions. Max Verstappen has already smashed the record here so far this season with a win from 7 different grid slots. He actually broke the record tied by Alan Jones, Alan Prost, and Kimi Räikkönen. Alan Prost, kind of crazy actually, 1990, never even won a race from pole, but I guess he had the kind of Senna McLaren to deal with at that time, but he was a master, of course, of performances during the race. But yeah, Verstappen's just gone to smash the record, and if he gets a win from 5th or 6th or 8th or 9th or something, he could extend this record to being the point of pretty much being unbreakable. But very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you are new, take care, and I'll see you next time.